Welcome back to the Reading and Writing Podcast. My guest today is Sean Patrick Hazlett, editor of the new anthology, Weird World War IV. Sean is a 2017 winner of the Writers of the Future contest. More than 40 of his short stories have appeared in publications such as the Year's Best Military and Adventure SF, Year's Best Hardcore Horror, Terraform, Galaxy's Edge, Writers of the Future, Grimdark Magazine, Visterion, and Abyss and Apex, among others. Publishers Weekly wrote about the anthology. The sheer weirdness of many of these pieces is a testament to the genre's creativity and verve. Sean, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for inviting me, Jeff.
Sure. Well, if someone listening hasn't yet heard about the new anthology that you edited, Weird World War IV, how would you describe the new anthology?
So I would describe it as a series of stories covering the war after the next war. And by the next war, I mean World War III, which there was a predecessor anthology. This is actually the second anthology in a series, which was called Weird World War III. And that anthology was about it was released in 2020, and it was about a hypothetical war between the United States and the Soviet Union, which sometimes fiction, fact is stranger than fiction because it was almost predictive. But this particular anthology, Weird World War IV, is about the war after the next war with a twist, and that twist is that each of the stories not only had to do some world building as to what World War IV would look like. Each of the stories also had to have that weird element. And when I say a weird element, think of Stephen King meets Tom Clancy. Those are the kinds of stories that are in this particular anthology. Now, the World War III that was envisioned, it doesn't have to be as specific as it was in the predecessor anthology, i.e. it need not have been between the United States and Soviet Union. It could have been between the United States and China. It could have been with an alien species. It could have been with literally anything. And in doing so, and you somewhat constrain what the authors can write about, but it almost unlocks even more creativity when you look at the stories. Because the range here is massive.
Well, do you remember the original idea or impetus that led you to edit Weird World War IV?
In terms of how I came up with the theme, or
yeah, sure.
Just why this series?
I mean, you mentioned the earlier anthology. I was just curious. Did you know going into that one that you wanted to do a fourth one, or how did that work?
I actually, going into that one, if it was successful, and it was, and still is, I wanted to do a series. The next ones that I wanted to go to were actually Weird World War I and Weird World War II. And then my editor or my publisher, recommended that, I think they felt that those two areas, like that ground, had been tread a little bit too much. And, I think to some extent they're probably right about that. I still want to do both of them, but they recommended, well, how about like a Weird World War IV instead? And I said, yeah, absolutely. And then what I did is I started out with Einstein's famous quote, right? Like, I don't know what the weapons of the Third World War will be fought with, but the Fourth World War will be fought with rocks, right? Or something to that effect. Sure. And what I wanted with this one is I didn't want all post-apocalyptic stories. I have some, but I also encouraged writers to, potentially treat it as a conventional conflict as well, in terms of, World War III. And then as they go into this kind of World War IV, it gives them a lot more latitude as to what the possibilities are. So let's say, there's some stories in there where there was a conventional World War III, and then aliens come out of a dimensional pocket and obliterate the human race, and the human race is trying to recover from that. And there are other stories that go the straight apocalyptic route. One story by horror and noir writer Laird Barron take the perspective of a hyper intelligent cybernetic war dog, or war kind of canine, and it's written from the perspective of a canine. So you're reading something that envisions, it's non-human. I mean, it's really like he really does a fantastic job of creating a hyper intelligent non-human canine, and it is a very fantastic and otherworldly, surreal kind of story in the kind of like several thousand years in the far future. So there's definitely a wide variety. John Langan, for example, another horror writer, Bram Stoker, horror writer, he does something like extremely experimental. So he has a post-apocalyptic story, which is a play. It's like a post-apocalyptic Arthurian post-apocalyptic play. So there's a lot of range in this one.
That's great. Well, as I mentioned in the intro, you've had 40 or so short stories yourself published. What was your initial writing journey that led you to getting your very first short story published?
So I just started writing a short story a month and getting, and submitting and getting rejected, and submitting and getting rejected. If you're in this field, you need to have rhino skin, because you're going to get rejected more times than, you can still count, but I would say I probably have on the order of, I should admit this publicly, but people need to know, because a lot of people have their first story rejected and they quit, and they shouldn't. But, if you keep trying, you will be successful. But I have over 2,000 rejections, short story rejections. And you just keep writing and you keep getting better. And the one thing that really helped buoy my resolve in submitting was this contest called the L. Ron Hubbard's Writers of the Future contest. And it is a contest for amateurs. You can't have been professionally published. And I think there's very more specific requirements. It might be you can't have had like 3 professional short story sales by then, but by the time you win or something like that, or by the time you submit. But what that contest is anybody can enter it. It is 100% anonymous. So, your skin color doesn't matter. Who doesn't matter. Who you're friends with doesn't matter. If you're a famous person or not, doesn't matter. All that matters is the quality of your story. And if it's offered once a quarter, and there are 3 winners each quarter, first, second, third place. And then at the end of that particular submission year, there are 12 winners, and then sometimes 1 or 2 finalists as well, of people whose stories were good enough to make the anthology, but not good enough to win the contest. Or, most of these stories are good enough to win the contest, because there's a lot of, when you get to the top of the slush pile, there are, very minor things can make the difference. But at the end of the day, there's about 12 to 14 people who are in this, anthology, and you get a full expensed trip to Hollywood. There's an award ceremony, and it's probably the fanciest award ceremony that you'll see in the science fiction, fantasy, and horror genre. You get, not only get a check for your story and the trip, but you also, get another check to buy your story, so it goes into the anthology. And then that anthology, is marketed around the world, and it really puts your name on the map. It's a tremendous opportunity. So I entered that contest. It took me maybe 17 submissions before I was actually able to win. And then along the way, the other thing that the contest does is it it gives you a lot of encouragement. So even if you don't win, you can get something called an honorable mention or a silver honorable mention or semifinalist or finalist. And finalists don't always win, but I think there's I think eight to 10 finalists. I'd have to look at my notes, but about 3 of those finalists win each quarter, and then some might be eligible to have their story published in the anthology. So by entering that contest every single quarter, not only did I make sure that I had a high quality story to submit, but I also was able to get the feedback that I needed to really press on when, the writing life is a life of constant rejection, and you can't take it personally. There's just, if you look at it in business terms, there's very low barriers to entry. Everybody has a word processor. If they have a laptop, they have, the chances are they have a word processor. They can write and they can submit. And, about 80 to 90% of those submissions are just absolutely terrible. But even though that last 10%, it's a really tough gig. Even if your stories are in the top 10%, there are magazines and anthologies that only accept 0.5 to 1%. So even if you get into that top 20, you have a 1 in 10 to 1 in 20 chance of selling a story to these to many of these anthologies. And then you're also competing with professional authors who are well known and have name recognition. And when you're, as an editor myself, right, if you have a big name author, sometimes it is better to have that big name author than to have a well-written and competent story, not an amazing story, but a well-written and competent story from, well, let me step back. It's better to have a well-written, competent story from a mega author than it is to have a well-written and competent story from an unknown, right? So that factor is always going to be in the background when you're submitting stories, as it should be, right? Because at the end of the day, as an editor or a publisher, you want to be able to sell anthologies, and those, a big name is going to encourage people to buy. And then a good story from an unknown will, make the buyer, after they made that purchase decision, feel better about that decision to purchase. And, that's kind of how the cycle works. So I know it's a long and meandering story, but that's how I got into the writing business.
Sure. Well, how can someone submit to the Writers of the Future contest or learn more about it if they're interested?
So just Google Writers of the Future contest or L. Ron Hubbard's Writers of the Future contest. And there is a website that has all of the rules on it. Better yet, or even better, if you go out and buy the latest anthology. I think they're up to volume 38. My story was published in volume 33 in 2017. But if you buy a copy of the anthology, the rules are typically published in the back of the book. And I actually encourage, it's probably better to do that. You can also get it on Kindle, so you can get it right away. I encourage you to do that instead of just kind of going to the website, because it'll also help you get a better feel for what sorts of stories place in the anthology. And that's also what I did. So I encourage people to do that. I bought a bunch of prior copies of, and if you don't want to buy it, just go to your library, right? The library carries them too.
Sure.
But, go through previous stories and just see what sorts of stories won, what kinds of stories were successful. And as you read, there'll be some things that are just not your forte, but there'll be other things that you absolutely enjoy, and it'll just kind of give you a sense for what wins, and it won't give you a sense for what doesn't, because you won't see any of those, but
Sure.
it'll give you a sense for what is good and what isn't.
So what was the editing process like for you for the anthology? Did you solicit all the contributors, or did you have an open call for manuscripts?
So as an untested editor, so Weird World War III was my first professionally published anthology and book. So for the first 2 times around, I definitely invited specific authors. And the way that I thought about doing that was, I touched on it a little bit earlier. My first anthology, people aren't going to buy it because my name's on it, because nobody knows, nobody knew who I was, right? They have no idea. So I needed to get authors whose work I really enjoyed, but who also could draw people to the anthology. So, there are a number. I'm probably not going to say them specifically because I don't want to, characterize authors in certain ways. But there are, New York Times bestselling authors that I recruited. And look, not everybody said yes, right?
Sure.
And the other thing too is I reached out to them before the publisher agreed to underwrite the anthology. And the reason I did that was, and I would be very straightforward. Like, look, I'm thinking about pitching this anthology to this specific publisher. Here's what the anthology will look like. There are no guarantees, but if I get a green light on this, would you be willing to submit a story? And then once I got enough authors that would command enough of a market to justify the cost of the anthology, then I put together a pitch, sent it to the publisher, and then to my surprise, it was greenlit. Now, to be 100% transparent, Weird World War III, going back to the first one, was not the first anthology I pitched. So generally, when I pitch anthologies, I make sure I have kind of 1 or 2 or 3 other pitches ready, so that if I get a rejection, I just go back with, all right, well, okay, I understand that didn't work. How about this? Even with Weird World War IV, that particular anthology, that I never pitched it, right? I pitched Weird World War I and Weird World War III, Weird World War I and Weird World War II. And this idea was actually suggested from the publisher, and I definitely thought it would be an intriguing premise, and agreed to do it. But in terms of producing the rest of the anthology, after you invite the authors, then it's very important to kind of firmly establish what the timelines are, because writers, and I'm going to try to say this politely, but I'm just going to be I'll probably just be blunt about it, are not generally business people. And, creative people, and I'm a creative person, right? But I'm kind of a creative person that is, that straddles kind of both the business, the commercial side and the creative side. And, a bit of it can be kind of tied back to my, educational background, right? So, if you look at my bio, I have 2 undergraduate degrees. One's in electrical engineering and the other's in history, right? So I'm kind of able to straddle that world. But many writers, I would say, in any given anthology, 30 to 40% don't turn their stories in on time. So you have to just plan for that, and you have to establish a timeline such that you get your stories in time that you're able to process it. So I will typically build in some buffer time, and frankly, it also makes it easier to reject people, right? So if somebody is late, not only late but egregiously late, and you have to find another writer in a short period of time who just frankly, it's not fair to them that they have to produce a story very quickly. But if that happens, and then you finish your anthology, and then somebody turns in their story months later, it's easy for you to say, "I'm sorry, like this was due 3 months ago." That said, it's also important to tell them in advance once you've closed the anthology, so they don't, if they haven't even started the story yet, they don't start writing it, right? But at least puts you in a position that you can be objective, and people don't get their feelings hurt, right? Because again,
Sure.
as creative types can also be very sensitive. Business types are not very sensitive. Right?
Hey, this is Jeff from the Reading and Writing Podcast. Do you know what I love when I'm reading a great new book? A cup of tea. It's such a fun ritual. Settling down with a cup of tea and a new novel that I'm excited to read. Why not treat yourself to a cup of Plum Deluxe teas? Every loose leaf tea is hand blended, fresh, using only the best ingredients. From bold black teas to relaxing herbal blends, incredible dessert teas, or fun floral flavors, there's a delicious tea waiting for you. And I'm not making this up. They have a flavor of tea called Reading Nook Blend Black Tea. It's a tea that pairs perfectly with reading, writing, and relaxing. Plum Deluxe is a family-owned business, and they have one of the best selections of delicious, flavorful herbal teas as well as bold black tea flavors. Visit plumdeluxe.com/listen and use the promo code RWP to save 12% on your first order. Tea also makes a great gift. That's plumdeluxe.com/listen and use the promo code RWP. There's nothing better than enjoying a great cup of tea with a good book. And now you can get your great tea from plumdeluxe.com.
Progressive presents Forced Metaphors about bundling your home and auto.
When you bundle your home and auto with Progressive, you get great savings and round-the-clock protection, which is as beautiful as looking your firstborn child in the eyes for the first time. Well, that's a bit much. Maybe it's more like looking your second-born child in the eyes for like the third or fourth time. Point being, the savings and round-the-clock protection are really, really magical.
Forced Metaphors, presented by Progressive. Bundle and protect today. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and affiliates. Discount not available in all states or situations.
Well, do you have any other anthologies that you're currently editing?
I am. So I'm working on an anthology called Weird World War III China. So it is very similar to Weird World War III, the original. This one is just envisions what would a future conventional war look like between the United States and China. So I got to be careful with these things, though, because when I put them together a year, 2 years later, a war starts. So,
well, I'm curious, when you sit down to work on a short story, do you usually know the plot ahead of time, or do you just have an image or character and start writing? How does that work for you?
I am a plotter. I am the worst pantser in the world. I probably have 35 stories, unfinished stories, in my file folders that started out as pantser stories. I may have been able to write one or two that way, but I am much better off if I kind of have an image, have an idea, and then I write a very basic outline. Even for short stories, there'll be some people who say short stories are too short to write an outline. I need an outline to write short stories, because I'll just get stuck. I'll start writing and I'll be like, what? Like, I don't even know where this thing's going. What? And it just gets, and then and I'll step away from it and then I'll come back and then the tone and mood will be completely different. So like I need guardrails, and the same is true for novels. So I started a novel back in December and I wrote a 10,000 word outline, and now it's, the first stage of it is paint by numbers, right? I just follow. Now that's not the ideal way to write, but it is a good way to write a first draft, because you have to tell yourself it's all going to be the first draft's going to be complete and utter crap anyway. But just get it on paper, and then you can shape it and mold it and sculpt it basically over time to make it, to improve it and to fix all the issues you had in the first draft. But if you don't put it on paper first, you'll never finish it.
Is that the first novel you've written?
Oh no, it'll be the third. The first one I just was never able to sell, and I didn't self-publish it. I think it's publishable. It got pretty far with a particular publisher. I think they had it for almost 2 years. Like they were seriously considering it, and they ultimately didn't buy it. However, I think if I have a more successful novel in the future, or a successful novel in the future, I think that one would easily be publishable after that comes out. Now, I could self-publish it, but I'm not. I'm just going to wait until I have something that people, the marketplace validates and wants to buy, and then that's just a quick release. If people are, publishers are demanding more from you, like, please get us something really fast. I'm like, oh yeah, I got this thing right here. And then I wrote another novel that I don't feel it's quite good enough yet to submit to anybody. And it just needs a lot more polish. And that's something I'll return to if people are demanding more content from me in a pinch. So, the first one is like a science fiction novel about World War II. The second one is a occult detective noir novel set in Oakland called Flatland. So, I'll get back to those. The current one I'm working on, I'm about halfway through, and that's just because I haven't, the last 2 months or so, I haven't had a ton of time to go back to it. But I quickly, wrote half a novel in 1 or 2 months. And that was all because I wrote that 10,000 word outline.
Sure. Well, what writing advice would you offer for listeners who may be working on their own short stories or novels?
So to be successful, you must write. Put your butt in a seat and write. You don't necessarily need to do it every day, but you need to establish some sort of goal. So, one short story a month, or one chapter a month, 2 chapters a month, just something. You don't always have to hit that goal. And also, you shouldn't make the goal so impossible that you're discouraged and you stop. The second piece of advice I would give is that, if you write, you have to submit. Don't keep polishing and polishing and polishing and polishing. If the world doesn't see it, you'll never sell it. The third piece of advice is make it a game. And, and when I say make it a game, this is in the kind of the submitting process. You're going to get rejected. So just, as soon as it comes back in, send it out to the next market right away. Just don't even think about it. Another game that, I'm not saying I do this, but there's a weird, like, the publishing industry in many ways is still extremely archaic. So one thing that publishers will do is that they'll have something called no simultaneous submissions, which means that if I send you a story, I can't submit it to anybody else. Okay, and this is particular for short stories. Novels, I think it's a little bit different. But what that does is, if you have a 1% chance or a 0.5% chance of selling a story to a market, that story is just sitting out there for 3 months and then gets a rejection, like a form rejection. So, one game you could play is called submission roulette. And in submission roulette is you look at the probabilities, right? If you're a math guy like I am, you look at, what's the probability that both these publishers will accept my story. And generally it's, if the probability that one accepts it and you assume they're independent, right? It's, if it's 0.5% for both, for each one, then chances are that it's far lower than that both were accepted. I don't encourage anybody to do this. I'm just saying, if you want to have a little bit of fun and you've been doing it for a while, right? And you kind of know that, look, I've submitted this to this market 60 times and every time is a form rejection, then submission roulette can be fun, right?
Just don't do it for your anthologies, right?
Oh, no, I don't do it. No.
I know, I'm kidding.
And the other thing is never do it to a market where you have a relationship. So if you sold a story, if you sold a story to a market where you have, but there are some that, like, I'm not saying I do this. I'm just saying it softens the blow of rejection
Sure.
because you're actually hoping that you don't get accepted. Part of it is hoping you don't get accepted to something. So it's like good sometimes. Okay, good. The first one rejected, but the story. So, if the other one accepts, it's fine.
That's great. Well, what anthologies or short stories have you read recently that you enjoyed beyond your own anthology?
So I enjoy Ellen Datlow's Year's Best Horror. I really enjoy those sorts of stories. There's another anthology called Under Twin Suns, which is an anthology about Robert Chambers, who is another weird author. It's like the whole. If you've ever seen True Detective, the first season, where they talk about Carcosa and the Yellow King and things like that. It is a really creepy kind of world where there's a play that people go to and it drives them mad. So sort of stuff like that. So there's an anthology based on that. That world called Under Twin Suns that I really enjoyed. Anything by Laird Barron. So there's I'm trying to think of I think he has 4 anthologies out right now. There's one that's called Swift to Chase. There's one called, I think, Occultation. There's 4. I mean, you can look it up, but I really enjoy his anthologies. There's another not anthologies, but collection. It's a collection from him. And then there's one by John Langan. Why am I blanking? There's several collections by John Langan that you can check out. Children of the Fang and Other Stories. That's the one I was thinking of. Is excellent. I definitely, I highly recommend that particular anthology. And there's also another anthology that's coming out in June that I have a story in. But the other stories in there are excellent, called Robo Soldiers, and it is an anthology about the future of warfare that focused on artificial intelligence and robotics, and most of the stories there are written by former military officers or intelligence officers. So again, I would highly recommend that.
That's great. Well, you mentioned that anthology that you'll have a story in, and you mentioned the anthology that you're currently working on next, which is World War III China, or Weird World War III China. I'm curious, do you have any other short stories scheduled for publication?
I do. There's another one in an anthology that will come out in December called Worlds Long Lost. And it is an anthology about like xeno-archaeological finds and expeditions. So imagine, if you think about stories by H.P. Lovecraft, like In the Mountains of Madness, right? Where there's a small team goes down to Antarctica for an archaeological dig, and they find this vast city with these massive cyclopean blocks and the usual Lovecraftian language, non-Euclidean geometries, and they find they stumble upon a vast ancient civilization that came long before humanity, and then people start disappearing, right? So like that particular anthology is inspired by stories like that. And I have a story in it called They Only Dig at Night. And it is a bit of a horror story.
That sounds great. Look forward to reading that. Well, where can people find you online if they'd like to learn more about you and your anthologies and the stories that you've published?
So in terms of where to find me, you can find me at my WordPress website at SeanPatrickHazlett.com. You can also I also encourage folks to check out my YouTube channel, which, I cover a bit of writing, a bit of geopolitics, and then I look at the intersection of, the military and the paranormal. So I look at, historical programs that the U.S. government ran, particularly intelligence programs that made use of remote viewing, things like that. But I have a YouTube channel that focuses on that. So I interview a lot of authors, as well as historians and people who are in the intelligence space, things like that. That website or that YouTube channel is called Through a Glass Darkly with Sean. So I highly encourage people to check that out. You can also find me on Twitter at Sean P. Hazlett. And then I'm also on Facebook, Instagram, MeWe, Patreon, LinkedIn, and a number of other social media sites. In terms of where to find Weird World War 3 and 4, you could find them on my website. You could find them on my YouTube channel. So in the description of any particular episode, you can click directly on the links. Or you can, if you go to Walmart, Target, Barnes and Noble, any place books are sold, and you should be able to find either anthology.
That's great. Well, again, we've been speaking with Sean Patrick Hazlett, editor of the new short story anthology Weird World War 4. You can go buy a copy of the anthology today. And if you're a short story writer, check out the writers of the future contest today and submit a story. And Sean, thanks for doing this interview.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me, Jeff.
Absolutely. That was great.
Sure, we have 30 seconds to tell you that drivers who switch to Progressive could save big. But then what? We could romance the legal copy. It never gets the attention it deserves. And some lawyer worked real hard on it. So take it away, lawyer.
Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. National annual average insurance savings by new customers surveyed who saved with Progressive in 2020. Potential savings will vary.
Now that was some beautiful legal. Well done, lawyer. Well done.
Target has Laundry Day covered because they offer a great selection of concentrated Tide Pods to help with all your laundry needs. Tide Pods clean, freshen, and help rejuvenate your clothes with odor fighters and stain removers. Did you know Tide Pods clean better than the leading liquid bargain detergent? Tide Pods are powerful enough to make your whites white and your brights bright, even in cold water. Just toss in 1 Tide Pod for small loads, 2 for medium, 3 for large. It's that easy. For great value and convenient pickup options, get Tide Pods today at Target.